It was a calm morning at Arlington National Cemetery. The air felt peaceful, and the white marble of the tomb of the unknown soldier shone softly under the morning sun. Tourists and visitors stood behind the ropes watching in silence. They came from all over the country to see the tomb guard, the soldier who walked back and forth 21 steps each way, guarding the resting place of America's unknown heroes. Among them that day was Sergeant Michael Hayes, one of the most disciplined tomb guards ever assigned to the duty. His uniform was spotless, his shoes polished until they reflected the sky. His face showed no emotion. Every movement was perfect, practiced, timed, and performed with deep respect. Hayes had been a tomb guard for 2 years. He never smiled on duty, never spoke unless it was an order, and never broke formation, no matter the weather. His focus was total. Visitors often whispered in awe when they saw him march. He seemed like a man made of stone, completely dedicated to his duty. That morning, however, there was something different in the air. The guards had been told that a very important guest was coming, General Robert Langston, a highly respected officer who had led American forces in several missions overseas. The general was known for his sharp eye and his high standards. He was visiting Arlington to observe the ceremony and meet the soldiers who carried out one of the most sacred duties in the military. When the general arrived, the other soldiers stood straighter than ever. Even the air seemed to grow still. Hayes continued his guard duty, not reacting to the presence of the general as he was trained to do. His polished rifle rested on his shoulder, his steps steady and sure. The sound of his shoes striking the pavement echoed in the silence, tap, 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 steady as a clock. After several minutes, the changing of the guard began. The ceremony was flawless. Every movement was precise, every salute sharp and synchronized. Tourists watched with wide eyes as the relief guard and Hayes performed their silent ritual. When the final inspection was complete and the ceremony ended, the general walked toward Hayes. The soldiers nearby watched quietly. It was rare for anyone to approach a tomb guard while he was still on duty, but the general was allowed. He stood in front of Hayes, his posture firm, his eyes studying the young man in front of him. Outstanding discipline, soldier, the general said in a firm but respectful voice. Thank you, sir, Hayes replied without hesitation, his tone professional and calm. The general nodded slowly, then asked almost out of curiosity, Tell me, Sergeant, what's your call sign? At first it sounded like a simple question. A few of the younger soldiers nearby exchanged looks, thinking it was just a friendly exchange. But when Hayes answered, his voice was steady and his words carried an unexpected weight. Sir, he said clearly, my call sign is Ghost 1. For a moment, everything around them fell silent. Even the tourists who didn't understand the meaning of those words could feel something shift. The general's expression froze. He looked at Hayes for a long second, his eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in recognition. The soldiers standing nearby grew tense, sensing that Ghost 1 wasn't just a name. The general took a small step closer. His voice softened slightly. Ghost 1, he repeated quietly. I've heard that before. Hayes didn't respond. His face remained steady, his eyes forward. But there was something in the air, a deep, quiet respect mixed with curiosity and sadness. The general stood still for a few seconds, then gave a slow nod, as if a memory had just returned to him. Without saying another word, he placed his hands behind his back and turned away. The ceremony continued as normal, but everyone could tell that something had changed. The soldiers exchanged small glances. The tourists whispered, wondering what had just happened. Later that day, when Hayes returned to the guard quarters to rest, some of the other guards couldn't hold back their curiosity. One of them asked, Hey man, what was that about? Why did the general look like he'd seen a ghost when you said your call sign? Hayes didn't answer right away. He quietly placed his rifle on the rack and adjusted his gloves before turning to face them. His eyes were calm, but there was a hint of sadness in them. It's a long story, he said softly. One that doesn't belong out here. The other guards respected his silence. They knew every tomb guard carried his own history, his own reason for choosing such a difficult and sacred duty. Hayes's story, whatever it was, clearly went deeper than most. That night, the general requested to meet Hayes privately. The guards were surprised. Generals rarely did that. When Hayes entered the small office, the general stood by the window, looking out over the glowing lights of Arlington. The rows of white tombstones stretched into the distance like silent witnesses. When Hayes saluted, the general returned it slowly. "At ease, Sergeant," he said. Then turning toward him, the general asked quietly, "I need to know. Why Ghost One?" Hayes looked down for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sir, it's not just a call sign," he began quietly. "It's a memory." The general didn't interrupt. He could tell this was not something the young man spoke about often. Hayes continued, "Years ago, before I came here, I was in a small recon team overseas. Our mission went bad, really bad. We were surrounded. Everyone thought we wouldn't make it. I called in for air support, and when I gave my position, I knew it meant I might not make it out alive, but it was the only way to save my team." He paused. "When it was over, they told me the rest of my unit didn't make it. They thought I was gone too. For a week, I was listed as missing in action. When they finally found me, they called me Ghost One, because I was the one they thought was gone." The general's eyes softened. He knew exactly what kind of man stood before him. Hayes wasn't just a guard. He was someone who had carried the weight of loss, and now chose to spend every day honoring those who never came home. The general didn't speak for a long moment. Then he simply nodded and said, "Thank you, Sergeant." As Hayes left the room, the general looked back toward the tomb of the unknown soldier. The name Ghost One echoed in his mind, not as a title but as a symbol. He understood now why the young man's discipline was so perfect, why his movements carried such meaning. He wasn't just guarding a monument. He was standing watch for all the brothers who could no longer stand beside him. That night the cemetery was quiet again. But for those who had witnessed the moment earlier that day, it was something they would never forget. The silence that followed Hayes's words and Ghost One had said more than any speech ever could. After that first encounter with the general, Hayes returned to his routine at the tomb of the unknown soldier. But something inside him had shifted. The memory of his past mission overseas, of the loss he had endured, felt heavier than ever. Every step he took along the marble platform was not just a step in ceremony. It was a step in remembrance of the men he had lost, the friends he had promised to honor, and the life he had been given as a second chance. It had been years since that fateful mission. Hayes remembered every detail as if it had happened yesterday. The team had been small, only 5 of them deep behind enemy lines in a mountainous region. They were trained, skilled, and prepared for most challenges, but the ambush had come with overwhelming force. Hayes's team had been pinned down, and communication with headquarters had gone dead. His heart had pounded as he made a decision he would carry for the rest of his life. He had called in air support on his own location, knowing that the strike might take him along with the enemy. It was a moment of total sacrifice, of courage and desperation intertwined. He remembered the deafening sound of the planes overhead, the smoke, the dust, and the silence that followed. When the rescue team finally arrived, they found only him alive. His body was bruised, his uniform torn, his hands scarred, but his heart was heavy with grief for the friends he had lost. They had jokingly called him Ghost One before the mission, but after surviving when everyone else had fallen, the name had taken on a new, almost sacred meaning. Back at Arlington, every guard could see the weight Hayes carried, though he never spoke of it while on duty. He believed the tomb required complete focus, total devotion, and a heart fully committed to honoring the unknown soldiers. To him, it was not just a ritual, it was a responsibility. Each visitor who paused to watch him march, each person who silently observed the ceremony, carried the memory of countless unnamed heroes in their hearts, and Hayes felt their presence with every step. Days passed, but the general's visit lingered in Hayes's mind. The quiet respect in Langston's eyes had been different from any inspection or commendation Hayes had ever received. There was no performance involved, only recognition. It was the kind of acknowledgement that understood sacrifice without words. And Hayes knew the general's curiosity wasn't just about a name. It was about the story that came with it, the invisible scars that shaped the man standing guard. A few days later, Hayes received a message requesting a private meeting with the general. He was surprised, but he followed protocol. Walking through the quiet corridors of the military office building, Hayes felt a familiar tension, the kind that came before sharing something personal. When he entered the room, the general was already there, standing by the window looking out over the cemetery below. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the rows of white marble. "Sergeant Hayes," the general said, turning to face him, "I want to understand. Ghost 1. Tell me everything you're willing to share." Hayes saluted, then relaxed into the conversation. He began recounting the story of that mission overseas. Every detail came back vividly. The mountains, the ambush, the chaos, and the desperate decisions. His voice was calm, even as the memory stirred the deep sorrow of loss and survival. He told the general how he had saved his team, called in air support, and walked away alive while everyone else had fallen. The general listened quietly, his face serious, his posture steady. He asked only a few questions, the kind that showed respect rather than doubt. Hayes explained how the nickname Ghost One had first been a joke, a small piece of levity in a dangerous world. But after the mission, it became something else, a symbol of survival, guilt, and remembrance. "Every day I guard the tomb," Hayes said softly, "I think of them. I think of my team. I think of every soldier who never came home. This job, it gives me a way to honor them, to make sure that someone remembers." The general didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded, absorbing the weight of Hayes's words. For him, this wasn't just a soldier giving a report or a testimony. This was a man who carried the memory of fallen comrades in his very being, and who now honored that memory in one of the most sacred ways possible. After a long pause, the general finally spoke. "Sergeant, I have inspected many units, many soldiers, but few carry their duty like you. You are not just a tomb guard, Michael. You are a living testament to every sacrifice that has been made. You are Ghost One in every sense." Hayes felt a quiet pride, but not the kind that comes from recognition or praise. It was a solemn pride, the kind that comes from knowing that the lives of others are remembered, that sacrifices are honored, and that even in silence, one can speak volumes. The general left shortly after, but the encounter had a lasting effect. Hayes returned to the tomb with renewed focus. Every step, every salute, every pause felt heavier and more meaningful than ever before. Visitors noticed the intensity in his march, the sharpness of his movements, but no one could see the memories that walked with him silently. Word of Hayes's story began to quietly spread among the guards. Some of the newer recruits asked questions, curious about the man known as Ghost One. Hayes answered them, but carefully. He did not seek attention or praise. He simply wanted others to understand that the tomb was not just stone and ceremony. It was a living memory, a place to honor the sacrifices of those who could no longer speak for themselves. In the evenings, when the tourists had gone and the lights cast long shadows over the cemetery, Hayes would sometimes sit alone on the benches near the tomb. He would think of his team, of that mission and of the lives that had been lost, but he would also think of the honor he had been given, the ability to stand guard, to be a symbol, to give voice to those who no longer had one. The name Ghost One had once been a symbol of fear and survival. Now it had grown into a symbol of respect, duty, and remembrance. Every step he took on the marble platform, every salute, every precise turn, it was all a tribute to the fallen. Hayes knew that even if no one else understood fully, the soldiers he honored did. They walked beside him in spirit, unseen but present, and the weight of their memory guided every motion. And so, day by day, Hayes continued. The visitors came and went, cameras clicked, and whispers filled the air. Yet Hayes remained steadfast, a figure of unwavering discipline, silently carrying the weight of history, sacrifice, and memory. The story of Ghost One was not just a story of survival. It was a story of devotion, of honor, and of the quiet courage that existed in every soldier who had ever stood watch for those who could no longer stand themselves. By the time the sun set, casting golden light over Arlington, Hayes had completed another day of guarding the unknown soldier. He returned to the barracks, removed his uniform carefully, and prepared for the next day. For him, Ghost One was more than a name. It was a mission, a promise, and a life dedicated to remembering those who never came home. The next morning at Arlington National Cemetery was quiet, almost eerily so. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of flowers from nearby graves. Sergeant Michael Hayes stood on the marble platform, preparing for the changing of the guard. His uniform was as perfect as ever, every crease sharp, every shoe polished until it gleamed. But inside he felt a subtle shift, a sense that today would be different. The previous encounter with General Robert Langston had lingered in Hayes's mind. The general had returned to his duties, but Hayes could still feel the weight of that silent acknowledgement, the quiet understanding that had passed between them. He did not know it yet, but the general had asked to come back, this time not as an observer of protocol, but as someone who wished to honor what Hayes represented. As the noon ceremony began, Hayes marched with his usual precision. Every step was steady, measured, deliberate. Tourists and visitors gathered in their usual spots, snapping photos, watching with quiet curiosity. But there was a tension in the air that day, one that most could not explain. Even the other guards seemed to notice it, exchanging glances as Hayes moved with unwavering focus, and then the general arrived. This time he came alone in full uniform but without entourage or cameras. The soldiers on duty straightened immediately, sensing that something important was about to happen. Hayes continued his march, never breaking form, his face stoic as always. The general stepped onto the marble platform. The crowds noticed and a hush fell over the visitors. No one spoke. The moment felt almost sacred. The general, a 4-star officer who had led thousands in battle, now stood before one young soldier, giving him a presence that was both respectful and profound. Hayes completed his turn, paused for the 21 steps, and then faced the general. Without a word, the general raised his hand and delivered a perfect salute. Hayes, trained to acknowledge all ranks, returned it immediately, his movements crisp and deliberate. But this salute carried a weight unlike any Hayes had experienced before. Every visitor could feel it. The silence was heavy, full of respect. Cameras clicked, but even the photographers seemed hesitant to break the quiet. The general's salute was not just a gesture of rank or formality. It was a salute that spoke of understanding, of sacrifice, and of recognition for a life lived in honor of others. When the salute ended, the general took a small step forward. His voice was calm but carried authority and warmth. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, "you have stood watch for soldiers who cannot stand for themselves. Today we stand watch for you. You are Ghost One, not just in name but in courage, devotion, and honor. Never forget the impact of your service." Hayes lowered his head slightly in response, a gesture of respect. He did not smile, but inside a sense of quiet fulfillment filled him. He had spent years walking the platform, guarding the unknown soldier, carrying memories too heavy for words. Yet in that single moment, the general had acknowledged everything he had sacrificed and everything he had done to honor those who never came home. After the ceremony, the general stayed a few moments longer, speaking quietly to Hayes. He did not lecture, nor did he ask for stories of past missions. Instead, he simply stood beside him and spoke of honor, courage, and the responsibility of remembering the fallen. Hayes listened, feeling a rare connection, a bond formed not in combat but in respect and understanding. Word of the encounter spread quietly among the tomb guards. They did not speak loudly of it, because such moments were sacred, meant to be felt rather than displayed. But every guard who knew Hayes began to see him differently. Ghost One was no longer just a name. It had become a symbol, a reminder of bravery, of survival, and of the silent duty every soldier carried in some form. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that salute lingered. Visitors continued to come, tourists still whispered in awe, and Hayes continued his walk back and forth, 21 steps each way. Yet now there was a subtle difference. He walked not just as a guard, but as a witness, a protector, and a representative of countless soldiers who had given everything. At night, after the cemetery emptied and the lights cast long shadows over the rows of white marble, Hayes would sit alone near the tomb. He would reflect on the past, on his fallen team, and on the lives he had vowed to honor. But he also reflected on the present, on the recognition he had received, and on the understanding that someone of the general's rank had seen him, not just as a soldier, but as a person who carried history in every step. He thought of the name Ghost One, once a nickname, then a title, now a living testament. Each step on the marble platform, each careful turn, and each salute became more than just ceremonial. They became a language of memory, a tribute to courage, and a declaration that no sacrifice would ever be forgotten. Over time, Hayes's story became known quietly within military circles. New recruits asked about Ghost One, and Hayes would answer with care, never seeking glory, only ensuring that the meaning behind his duty was understood. He would tell them about the importance of discipline, honor and remembrance, and how each step, each pause, each salute carried the weight of lives given in service. Visitors continued to watch, unaware of the story behind the man. Yet even they could feel it, the weight, the discipline, and the quiet dedication that filled the air around the tomb. Ghost One had become more than a soldier. He had become a symbol of the living connection between the present and the past, between those who serve and those who have fallen. And so, day after day, Hayes continued his walk. The sun rose and set, seasons changed, and tourists came and went. But he remained steadfast, a figure of unwavering dedication, silently carrying the memory of friends, brothers, and countless unknown soldiers. The name Ghost One, once a whispered joke in a dangerous place, had grown into a title of profound meaning, a reminder of the courage it takes to survive, the responsibility it carries, and the honor of standing guard for those who cannot stand themselves. In the quiet of the cemetery, with only the sound of his shoes on the marble and the gentle rustle of the trees, Hayes fulfilled his mission every day. He had once been a soldier who survived when others did not. Now he was a soldier who gave voice to the silent, honor to the fallen, and hope to every visitor who paused to witness the solemn beauty of duty. The salute from General Langston that day became part of the unspoken history of Arlington. It was a reminder that even in the vast machinery of the military, individual courage, sacrifice, and honor could be recognized, respected, and remembered. Ghost One had walked through fire and loss, and now he walked the platform of the tomb with the weight of history in his steps, carrying the memory of all who had given everything. And in that continued, silent march, Sergeant Michael Hayes, Ghost One, became more than a soldier. He became a living testament, a guardian of memory, and a reminder that courage and honor, though often invisible, always leave a mark on the world.